G'day folks, having another look at the Foxtrap beach here. Today I'm standing in what's known as All Saints No. 1 Cemetery, graveyard, whatever you want to say. This is the first settlers, the very first settlers that came to this place called Foxtrap, and is now called Conception Base South, of course. Some of the gravestones you can see are relatively elaborate, although there are quite a few here that are just flat rocks that people picked up from the beach. It's these people who put these rocks here for their loved ones and relatives that had passed on. These people were poor people, and they couldn't afford, a lot of them, the cost that would be associated with erecting a professionally made monument. So while some people were fortunate enough to have the resources to be able to do this, a lot of them did not. And you can see that reflected here as we take a look around and notice that there's an awful lot of little flat rocks that at one point in time probably were painted with the name of the person that is buried there. But certainly now, over the years, this paint has dried and weathered away and moved. Some people were really fortunate, and they built tombs in the ground, so you could really see the reflection of higher class, lower class, middle class, whatever you want to say, whatever way you want to describe it, but people who had the money to erect significant sizes of monuments, and yet those who could barely afford to pick a flat rock off the beach. And you'll see that most of the flat rocks here, most of them, is a reflection that most people were poor. This is the oldest grave site in this area that's known, and it was also the site of the very first church here in this area. So this would stand to reason that this would be the oldest community, is where people settled first here. People settled first in this area before stretching out to the rest of the shore. It stands to reason if the first oldest cemetery and the first church was here, well, this is where the earliest people gathered, and they didn't travel too far. Travel in those days was difficult and had to be done with slightly different means than what you use today. It's long before the introduction of the internal combustion engine and all of this stuff that we take for granted today. So the oldest church was here. It was known as St. Paul's. And the earliest settlers erected the church here, called it St. Paul's, and eventually, as in the style, of course, of all old graveyards, the cemetery encircled the church. The next, this was the first church on Church Road. The next church was in there, in what they call number 2 graveyard. The next video will be on that. And that's where the second church was too, on Church Road. But right here where I'm standing, this is where the first church was. It was a very small building apparently, and only had to serve a small amount of parishioners. The early settlers came here from across the bay, Portgrave and Harbour Grace, and the general area as well. Also, too, people, believe it or not, lived at one point in time on Kelly's Island. There was a man on Church Road operated a sawmill. His family was the last family to move from Kelly's Island over here to Foxtrap. Anyway, we're just looking around, looking at the earliest place on the shore that people lived. This little pond here is known as Paddy's Pond. It's supposedly named for an Irishman who apparently, according to the legend, lived in a sod tilt on the side of that pond. Now, I haven't been able to find much information or recorded evidence of Paddy Maley was his name, but there are people, his descendants, who lived for a little while and carried on his name for a while, but eventually died off, and I'll be doing another video on that story as well. Back to the cemetery. Like I said, a lot of these are very very old. It goes back quite a few years, you know. This one here is a Da gentleman. This is the way Da used to be spelled. And of course, they were some of the earlier settlers in Portygrave, and here as well, where the original settlers moved in. And Portygrave, too, the Da family owns the oldest deed of land in Portygrave, the oldest deed of land on the island of Newfoundland. Dates previous 15 years before John Guy came here, to 1595. Very interesting stuff. When you start to do a little bit of research into our history and family tree and the genealogy and all this stuff, there's a lot of unanswered questions. Every now and again you get to find a few snippets of information that'll bring you around and help fit in a little piece of the puzzle. But a lot of questions still remain unanswered. Evidence that you can see certainly means something. You can certainly see all these flat rocks that have been left as grave markers that don't have any names on them, but like I said earlier, they were probably painted at one point in time and no longer have any paint on them because they're certainly all washed away. The very first settlers to this area. This is where they lived. This is where they went to church. This is where they got buried. And they're still here to this day. The next video I do will be on the next graveyard in the road. You can see a few headstones in there that way. The next video I'll do from in there is where the second church on Church Road was situated at one point in time. I'm trying to get a picture of that to go with that video to show what it looked like back then. Hopefully I'll be successful, but we'll take a wait and see on that one. As we leave here, we'll close the gate, and it's very stiff. It appears that it hasn't been opened in quite some time. We'll replace the bolt that was there. If anybody wants to look it up for themselves, All Saints Anglican Cemetery number 1 in Foxtrap. They claim circa 1850. That's the oldest known. A lot of these with rocks as markers, there's no date, so you really can't tell. I'm thinking this was probably started more like the 1700s. That's when people first started coming across the bay here and settling on this side. Hope you watched the video. If you'd like to get a video, guys, and share it around with your friends. They can take a look, and if you feel adventurous, come down and have a look and see where the earliest settlers, the Conception Bay South, landed in Foxtrap, and a lot of them are still here today. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye bye.